I'm looking at this map here this morning, and I just can't but think how different it looks from what we were dealing with in the heart of winter. The western U.S., the pretty colors there. You look over in the central, more so the eastern U.S., and that's where we have a lack of advisories here. Looking at the all hazards map here from NOAA this morning, Tuesday, February 17th, and what you can see in the middle, if not just kind of the western high plains there, those are the red flag warnings in pink, kind of intermixed both behind them and kind of on the flanks there. Those are the high wind warnings. In that mustard color, we have wind advisories, and that kind of more traditional beige color. And this is a wind event that we're expecting here this morning before lunchtime, be moving through the high plains and then thereafter. You go to the west of that, the pink colors, you have the winter storm warnings, which are currently active for portions of the Intermountain West, Utah, Colorado Plateau, over in the Sierra Nevadas, the Klamath Mountains, even down into what we call the transverse ranges here in Southern California, with flood watches posted for portions of Southern California. And it's busy out west, it's busy in the central west, and it's not busy in the eastern U.S. We even have these dense fog advisories, portions of New York, Ohio, down here near Houston. This is a flip from where we were in January, where the dense fog advisories were so often here over California or Washington or the Willamette Valley over Oregon. Now the activities over there with respect to the weather, and over in the eastern U.S., we're underneath the presence of that ridge, warmer temperatures, but also this kind of lack of flow and that dense fog advisories. One thing I will mention, as this low spins up here, you can almost kind of just see the trough here producing all these inclement weather effects over in the western U.S. As it spins up, we're expecting snowfall to begin later on here as we go through the blizzard warnings across Montana into the winter storm warnings, winter storm watches, again, all along the Canadian border here, all the way over to the UP of Michigan. Now, if I jump over it and show you the upper level height map here this morning, no surprise, there's the trough extending all the way down through the western U.S., ridge position across the eastern U.S. We can pick all of that up by just looking at the all hazards map. You almost don't need to jump over and look at this view. If we look at those winds down near the surface, prompting those red flag warnings, prompting the high wind warnings and advisories, see those coming out of the Four Corners region. We have this southerly flow coming up. We've been drier in this region, relative to winter, and that's why they're posting those red flag warnings, which should really be called, fire weather warnings, to make it clear, in my opinion, of what the real risk is there. But as these stronger southwest winds and westerly winds come over the continental divide here this morning, that's what those high wind warnings are really posted for. The southerlies, stiff southerlies out ahead of it, are a slighter concern, but it's that cold front once it moves through and the high winds behind it there. And I've been thinking about this because we have these winds picking up. You can see the red flag warnings posted here. And so often you're going to hear Eric and I talk about these long-range forecasts 2-3 weeks out in advance, months in advance in some cases when we're looking at these analog models for summer. But it's so important. We always say persistence can win the day. And what is happening here on the southern high plains, it has me on notice because in our analog packages, a lot of these years that Eric and I pulled up, we just talked about this even yesterday and the day before that, the central and southern plains, and some of these years that we've just mentioned, Eric mentioned 2023 yesterday, we plug in 18, 14, 09, 23, these kind of fading La Nina years tended to be drier in the spring, through the southern plains into the central plains. And you can kind of see that here even in the all hazards. These red flag warnings would not be posted, right, if this corridor was wet. You wouldn't have fire weather warnings if that area was wet right now. Curiously, the southeast, which has been dry this winter but gone over wet recently, also wetter than some of these analogs. So I'm just kind of, as I'm analyzing the current weather and the near-term forecast, right, I'm constantly comparing it to these analogs and benchmarks we've set up for ourselves this year. And at least right now, this one, at least for the drier signal, seems to be maybe materializing early on. Something we'll have to keep watching, and it's a story I'm going to watch closely as this unfolds. We'll go to the last 48 hours of precipitation. Obviously, California, the western U.S. Four Corners region, getting in on the precipitation here this weekend with that trough coming on shore. California, just almost the entire state here, receiving measurable rainfall, appreciable amounts, more so in the coastal ranges, as is often the case, but even into the Central Valley. Heavy snow up in the Sierras. The southeast, with the low moving through, got a good dose of rainfall. Again, that area maybe running on the lower end of anywhere else in the continental U.S. just for winter to date precipitation. But again, jumping over to California, if we go to the UC Berkeley Central Sierra Snow Lab, show their year-to-date, water year-to-date, that's through winter precipitation here, well below average. Fast start to the year in December, up through the new year, staying on average. And then since then, it's just been that big plateau all the way through the month of January into February, but now trending up in the right direction. I think if they had some more latest data here, That red line would be inching a little bit closer to average. We jump down. I love these live webcams. You're looking at like one of the snowiest places on Earth right now, and the flakes are flying this morning at the Central Sierra Snow Lab. Would be a fun place to hit with like a hot chocolate and a campfire. I don't know if they have that there, but they have a lot of measurements and weather data, and we appreciate that. But the flakes are flying in California here this morning with that trough over the western U.S. Just getting another look at it here. This is on water vapor satellite imagery. As I was just kind of eyeing this morning, did kind of notice you have this sort of subtropical branch to the jet stream here. We don't often see that in these La Nina years, but with it fading so quickly, with the water warming up in the far eastern Pacific, which is like down here, you're starting to see with that trough moving in a little bit of a kind of, I'm not going to call it like a bona fide subtropical jet, but something that looks a little bit closer to it, which again would kind of line up with some of these analogs. You bring that subtropical jet through, you can get more rain in the southeast in spring. So that's another thing. Again, kind of putting two and two together, trying to figure out where this thing is going as we get into the spring pattern. Look across the radar here this morning, probably not a surprise over the eastern U.S. Not really much to speak of. The western U.S. showers across a number of states here through the Willamette Valley. Light rain showers there. Much of California experiencing those as well. And the Four Corners region like Phoenix, Tucson, looking at rainfall here this morning. That's not common. And then over into Colorado, some of these snow showers getting into the more mountainous regions here. Also, if you look at the lightning map, we're winter here. It's February, and we got lightning all the way from Idaho. We're in like the upper Snake River Valley over toward Utah and Colorado, Southern California, hearing some rumbles of thunder this morning, even up in Northern California. Again, just indicative of the activity out here there this morning. Another thing we're watching, obviously, with those red flag warnings and the wind advisories and warnings are those maximum wind gusts. Checking here from the 3-kilometer NAM forecast. I'm going to take this forecast here through 6 a.m. See some of those high winds getting out onto the plains here this morning by 6 a.m., more so by 9 a.m., and then by noon all the way across the kind of northwest Texas panhandle, much of eastern New Mexico, into western Kansas. You can see up here in the Canadian Prairie, southeastern Saskatchewan, high winds along the Front Range and then out into the plains with this low wrapping up. That continues into this afternoon, stretching all the way over toward Kansas City this evening, up into central and northern Minnesota. Later tonight into portions of Eau Claire and Wisconsin. And then some of those wind gusts getting into the Midwest overnight tonight. Kind of a loud evening across a wide area of the country. Not damaging threshold, on a big pocket here, but still you can see these high winds making for kind of a noisy evening with respect to the windows and trees here across much of the Central U.S. as this low spins up and the snow starts later on here across those border regions. I'll check that here from the 3-kilometer NAM. This is the precipitation forecast. Again, watching this low spin up here over Montana, Northern Plains. Precipitation starting this evening across the Dakotas, Montana, Canadian Prairie, seeing those snow showers settle in here this evening. And those spreading, getting stronger, again, right across the border region. That's where you can kind of see that rain-snow line, maybe just to the south of that. Rain, Twin Cities, Eau Claire, over toward Green Bay, south of there, Chicago. This is on midnight tomorrow morning. Continuing to spin up, again, those blizzard warnings for eastern Montana as that low spins up, high winds associated with that, and then the snow just flying before that kind of meanders and exits out of the area. But then we have this additional low. Again, it's part of that same trough, but trying to spin up here on Thursday afternoon, somewhere over Iowa and Illinois, and that could be significant if we talk like 48 hours from now, potentially severe weather across the Mid-South or portions of the Ohio River Valley. We'll look at that in just a second here. But I'm looking over at the western U.S. Obviously, have the showers here this morning, but more pieces coming in, more of these little lows sneaking around that trough. So heavy snow continues in the Sierras today. Showers up and down the California coastline through this evening into the overnight. Then another shot as we go Wednesday into Thursday. So plenty of rainfall still on the way for California. I'm going to jump over and show you the ECMWF just so I can take that forecast out further. There's that low spinning up. That rain snow line a little bit further south on the ECMWF, the blizzard warning there in eastern Montana. We have the Canadian Prairie getting in on the snowfall there. That spins up into the upper Midwest, and then that next piece coming in behind it tomorrow on Wednesday for the western U.S. Better snowfall for the Intermountain West. We need that. They've been low this year. Precipitation spreading across the mid-Atlantic now, up into New England. Maybe Boston seeing a quick shot of snow from this. But more pieces coming into the west. There's that low I talked about over Iowa, now northern Missouri. Thursday afternoon, spinning up into Illinois by Thursday evening. And again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I'm keeping my eye on California. More heavy snow there by Thursday evening. And we could have severe weather out of this. We actually have enough moisture return into like the Ohio River Valley. This corridor here, the ECMWF isn't showing crazy high precipitation rates here, but we have flow, we have instability, and this is something we'll have to keep an eye on. The Storm Prediction Center already 3 days out now, I guess 2 days out, has already highlighted that area with a slight risk, kind of stretching from like Springfield, Illinois, all the way to Louisville, Cincinnati, further south along the Ohio River Valley. And we haven't seen kind of a Midwest severe weather event for quite a while, maybe even going back to like December. So this will be kind of interesting to watch on Thursday evening. Jump over and look at the GFS, just looking at the Cape really quickly, convective available potential energy. Basically, how much juice do these thunderstorms have to squeeze if they do form on Thursday evening? And there's not a lot, but you're talking like pushing up toward about 1,000 Cape here, and that's enough to at least get some minimal threshold of severe thunderstorms. So enough to keep an eye on. I think that slight risk makes a bit of sense from the Storm Prediction Center. I'd be surprised if they expand it far beyond that. But at least a corridor here through Indiana, Illinois, Southwest Ohio, and Kentucky. They could see some thunderstorms, maybe in the severe department. Anytime you're talking about that kind of severe threat, you want to see, I pulled this out to Thursday, these surface winds that we often look at. This actually has a forecast component to it. If you jump over here, earth.nullschool.net, and use the arrows, you can take this out like 5 or 6 days. And if you look at the surface flow, you can kind of track that trajectory all the way from the Gulf up into the Ohio River right there. And that's enough to bring that instability in. Obviously, you have the low organizing along the cold front there, potential thunderstorms. And anytime you want to get severe weather, you want to see these surface winds change as you go up in the atmosphere. So this is looking at the surface. You can see those nice south-southwesterlies. But okay, let's take it up to 850 and see if there's a big change either in speed or direction of that wind. And you get that plentiful amounts, to say the least. Nice change of direction. There's veering winds west to east there, and an increase in the wind speeds, particularly right there over the Ohio River Valley. Kind of paints a very obvious bullseye, I think, on Thursday in the Storm Prediction Center, highlighting that exact area very nicely with their morning update here. If we look big picture over the next 10 days of precipitation anomalies from the ECMWF, I kind of was jumping back between the Midwest, the Mid-Atlantic, and then obviously California as we stepped through that ECMWF precip forecast. And obviously California well above average. If I took that precipitation forecast from the ECMWF really far out, I'm going to take it into this weekend. You can see a lot of conditions calming down here across the middle part of the country here through the late weekend, but another system coming in over the western U.S., pushing across again through the upper Midwest, likely next week. Again, the exact details and the trajectory of that storm track not clear yet, but you'll notice it piles up quite a bit of precipitation here right across the central part of the country. That's Thursday. You're talking, well out into next week. I can't put too much of a Sharpie in that right now, but you're going to see that show up in those precipitation anomalies. That's why I wanted to mention it. What we are seeing here through this week, here's Friday, increased precipitation for the southeast through the end of this week, another shot of rain for them. So as dry as we were, I mentioned that earlier. I'm going to show you a picture of that in a second. We're trending over wetter here in the month of February. But that is why we see in the 10-day precipitation anomalies that stretch here through the middle part of the country, which again is dependent on that low track playing out exactly like it does next week, which I don't think we can, again, put a pin in that right now. What we are expecting is through the Canadian Prairie, the upper Midwest, obviously snow and rainfall through this corridor here. Unfortunately, for the southern and central plains, those high winds and a lack of precipitation, remember, I'm kind of excluding that because it's too far out in the forecast. This area lacking precipitation, going over dry with the high winds and the warmth, increasing the drought pressure here, right? We talked about that in the analogs. Obviously wet out to the west. We just look at the 7-day forecast from the WPC, very high values for the state of California. We have a nice shot of rainfall for the southeast that I mentioned, and then that stretch of precipitation all the way up from the Canadian Prairie all the way over to New England and the Mid-Atlantic here. If we look at the snowfall, again, let's put a big asterisk on this because I took this all the way out to 10 days. But the bigger story here, it's this corridor that I already painted in the western U.S. The California snow totals looking very impressive. If you were to include what's already fallen here, obviously there's flakes flying on the UC Berkeley webcam here this morning. But you're talking 3-4 feet plus in some of these locations. I picked on Truckee, California. That's actually just on the lee side of the crest of the Sierra, so maybe they're not going to get the most, but it is a decently populated city, and even their 7 and 15-day forecast, 28 inches out to 70 inches. You're just talking pretty extreme values. The GFS not quite as excited about that snowfall forecast, but only 20 inches, 2 feet of snowfall. Then you can look over at the NBM. Again, you're talking like 3-5 4 feet plus at this point. And you can kind of see activity here this week, a little bit of a lull, and then by the end of the weekend, picking up again. Obviously, kind of all bets are off. You go that far out in the forecast, we'll see what happens there. But 2 big shots of snowfall still yet to come for California and the Intermountain West, and it's snowfall that they need. Look at the T-Max. This is just looking at those maximum temperatures here from the National Weather Service. Play this out into Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, warmth spreading and situating across the Midwest. But behind that big low, you can imagine the wind component between that warmth and the cold air toward the west. You have much colder temperatures there over in the kind of western plains. These are highs. You're talking single-digit highs in Montana. It's February. That's not totally uncommon, but much colder than what we've been used to here recently. And that cold front stretching across the Midwest and through the Ohio Valley into the Mid-Atlantic and New England, kind of bringing an end to this brief warm-up here in February. But like Eric mentioned yesterday, that's going to continue Saturday, Sunday, Monday of next week. But then the warm-up's back on. Getting into early next week, you can see those warmer temperatures coming back onto the front range in the high plains. That warmth's going to continue to spread through the middle part of the country next week, despite this brief cool down. So again, looking at those overnight lows, that cold front comes through Friday and Saturday, bringing those lows well down across the plains and even into the Midwest and the Southeast. But again, this is going to be short-lived. You actually go back over warmer in the west briefly. But in the long range, Eric talked through this at the end of the video yesterday. We have this cold air, right? So those Montana single-digit highs, it's bottled up here on the Canadian prairie. They're locked in that cold air. But if you look out into the long-range forecast over on the right panel here, by and large, shifting back warmer in the day 10 through 15, even by the end of next week. So I think the warmth is sticking around despite the stratospheric polar vortex disruption that we're noting. Those don't always result in those cold air outbreaks. We might have to wait until early March. I'm not saying that chance is done yet, but at least right now, the warmth persisting, I think, for much of February at this point. The Climate Prediction Center, their 8 to 14-day outlook, they've gone back over warm again February 24th all the way out through the end of the calendar month. Only kind of cooler than average over into the northwest. And while I'm here, we'll look at the 8 to 14-day precip outlook. Again, that kind of nice flow in that direction, bringing more precipitation in the Midwest, more precipitation in the western U.S., the Intermountain West snowpack that's needed. But across the southern plains, that dry signal, across portions of the Gulf Coast, that dry signal that we've been keeping an eye on. And again, just over the last 60 days, I mentioned if anywhere in the country is below average, it's portions of the Oregon coastline or the Gulf Coast. It's starting to stretch further back toward the west here. These are the kind of areas that we're keeping an eye on here with this pattern change. The west doing better, this trending up, this trending down, and this corridor here. Lastly, I want to mention, as Eric was kind of talking through the analogs yesterday, I've been pulling up this suite of years here. I'm not going to call these analogs, so to speak, but they are in our broader analog package for these weak La Nina years that fade quickly into an El Nino in the following year. And I cherry-picked years here where we had significant drought pressure out into the growing season. So these aren't like a forecast. I intentionally found years that yielded poorly with respect to corn and soybeans in the middle part of the country, just as kind of a thought experiment here. So you'll see 2002 actually included 2023 because we had a lot of drought pressure early, at least significant enough for a big weather market in June, which I know people are watching closely this year, given where the prices are at. 2006, 1991 as well. And I want to see, is there anything we have to watch for in spring? We looked at this with respect to sea surface temperatures, and when we looked at sea surface temperatures, it told us that we really needed to keep an eye on this kind of stretch of water here, kind of on the line from Hilo, Hawaii, over to San Diego, and then up toward Anchorage. If that goes cold, the sea surface temperatures there, that tended to coincide with this more significant drought pressure across the middle part of the country. Now, I'm not looking at sea surface temperatures on this map here. These are just air temperatures. And the reason I pulled that up is I wanted to see, are there trends going into March and April that we want to watch for, which might, beckon drought pressure later on into the middle of the growing season, at least out into summer. And at least just with surface temperature, kind of very simply, we see this cold air from Anchorage down to Tijuana. I mean, that makes sense if you think about it kind of simply. If we're cooling off the water temperatures here, we're probably, have colder air there. So a cool west spring, warmth in the southern plains, warmth over in New England, warmer here, got that split divide, is something we might want to watch this spring if we're looking for increased drought risk in 2026. And this is sort of a split from winter. Remember, winter if we're kind of continuing that thought experiment, we were very warm here, record warmth across a wide area of the western U.S. here in the 25 to 26 winter. So this, if it's going to go around this way in spring, would be a big flip to where we've been. But we are seeing that kind of pattern flip right now, if you will, where we're going over warmer here and at least have been cooler here in the meantime, and particularly over in the southern plains, worried about some of that kind of drought pressure there. So, it's not to say that, this is where I think I'm leaning this year, but it's kind of interesting to look at. And then when we look over at the precipitation rate in spring on these kind of more significant drought years, and there's that southern plains, high plains drought pressure. Again, the color bar kind of not as tight as I want it to be here, but wet California, wet in the southeast, but drier here for the southern and the central plains here. So again, that kind of paints the picture of these more significant drought years that we might want to keep an eye on this year. So it would be, going and staying dry in the southern high plains, maybe more of those red flag warnings. Wetter for California, that probably wouldn't be a bad thing given where they're at with the snowfall. And then wetter over in the Gulf Coast, maybe indicative of that subtropical jet we saw kicking up. So it's not me saying, definite drought pressure this year or any means, but just kind of a playbook I'll be watching a little bit closer given where this current pattern flip has us. Eric mentioned yesterday, I took these 500 millibar height forecasts from the GFS ensemble, the ECMWF ensemble, the AI ensemble, which they have now. And there's really nothing to suggest in the long range that big cold air outbreak is going to materialize right now. It's still possible in early March. But again, you're getting way out into the month of March at this point, the 4th. Cold air is still bottled up over Alaska, Western Canada here at this point. There's that potential, given we're kind of storing that savings bank of cold air, but I don't see it spilling out into the Midwest anytime soon in the forecast. The CPC you saw from the 8 to 14-day outlook, still way on the kind of wetter and the warmer side for the middle and eastern part of the country. Other thing that we're watching out into next week with additional central U.S. low pressure system likely spinning up into the upper Midwest. Those winds are going to be returning to the middle part of the country as we get out into next week as well. So again, more of that evaporative pressure, some rainfall chance we saw through the kind of mid-south central portion of the country. That potential rainfall chance, we can't narrow it down yet, but that potential is there obviously. But high winds likely as a result of that, the CPC highlighting that with a moderate risk for that time period there. And then over on the Oregon coastline and the Washington coastline, they're not a stranger to those high wind events in spring either. Long-range forecast for the CPC was wet, obviously, in the 8 to 14-day outlook, and that's consistent across the ensembles as well. GFS, ECMWF, wet for the western U.S., wet for the northwest, and then wet for the Ohio Valley and north up into the upper Midwest. Rain snow line likely going to be on the northern side of that. Way out at the end of next week, some of the lows we're trying to track a little bit further south through the Ohio Valley. That would pull the snow maybe back toward like I-80 in the Chicago-Detroit corridor. But again, it's just too early to talk specifics on that. But that potential for that storm track through the Midwest is there. I know these are really small maps that I'm kind of pointing at. So I can blow those up a little bit. You can see that kind of corridor there through the Midwest looking wetter at the end of next week. The last thing I'll mention here, Eric pulled this up yesterday. The sea surface temperature is valid as of February 15th. That was 2 days ago. I've just been struck at how quickly this La Nina is fading. It's fading faster than expected here in February. We're warming up the sea surface temperatures here in the East Pacific. This is, you're getting close to, essentially El Nino 1 and 2 territory at this point. We're really warm across the whole, broader Central Pacific, but even the equatorial Pacific now. That La Nina is fading faster than I think any other analog that we've pulled up this year. So I mentioned those, the drought analogs. This whole area went over cooler by April. We're not seeing that yet. This is just a very weak La Nina at this point. We're heading toward neutral if we're not there already. And we didn't really see any of the analogs fade their La Nina this quickly by February 15th. So this is something to keep an eye on. Looks El Nino-y. You're even getting some of these warm anomalies kind of sprinkled in here, near Tahiti. So that's the story that we're going to keep watching here this spring. Eric's going to talk with you guys all tomorrow. As for today, thanks for watching.